of religion. And this is wonderful to see you all. It is such a delight to see so many faces and to have your presence here. We have one person in physical presence who is an utter delight in himself. That's none other than Ken Watson. He's with us. So, but to the rest of everybody here, we wish we could be in person, but this is very good to be in person this way. That said, I would love to introduce our speaker for tonight, our professor of practice for the spring of 2023. We are proud to announce this particular lecture series led by Nikole Lim, a speaker, educator, author, and founder of Freely in Hope, a nonprofit which equips survivors and advocates to lead in ending sexual abuse. Our Professors of Practice series is a cross-disciplinary lecture series that brings together leaders from social movements, industry, and the arts in conversation with our students who are scholars of religion and theology and ministry and the general public. At this time, I would also like to thank many people behind the scenes who were responsible for bringing this project to a fruition. I would like to thank Tara. Tara is here. She is signed under a different name, but Tara Weeks is here. She's our Assistant Dean for Academic Programming. So she's behind the scenes. Our marketing and communications person, Hallie Freed, is also maybe on here, but she was very much responsible for the text and messages that you might have received. So thank you to both of them, and also thank you very much to my partner here, Professor Leonard McMahon, whose class was generous enough to welcome us into their space. Professor McMahon and I will provide brief responses to Ms. Lim's lecture after it's done. So we want to engage in a kind of theology in public. What would that look like? So we presume no expertise in the study of theology or ministry, but we bring questions of religion and theology to bear on oppression, exploitation, and suffering in the world. So today's lecture is entitled Witnessing Dignity. If you've had a chance to read Ms. Lim's marvelous book, I know you would appreciate what she is trying to do. It really is to tell the story of the dignity of the human body, especially the human female body, especially the human female body that has been violated and attempts have been made to destroy its dignity. So this is critical. This is really practical theology in action. So for those of us who are scholars of religion, you understand what I'm saying. This is how you would bring it to life. In this first lecture, Lim will discuss the practice of identifying with stories that are not our own. She will begin by defining sexual violence and illustrate its pervasiveness from a local and global perspective. She'll help participants, all of us, to unlearn biases against other bodies and to learn to honor all bodies in their diversity and shared humanity. In a particular way, we were thrilled to invite Ms. Lim here because of her personal philosophy of how stories shape our perception of the marginalized. I would like very much to extend a very warm welcome to Ms. Lim to our community. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence here.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to share the screen so we can get started. I am just so honored and thrilled to be with all of you in person, virtually online. I've had deep admiration for folks at CSR, so it's good to just be in the same company with all of us learning together. So in our time together, I will be showing this movement of how I came to recognize that survivors of sexual violence have the potential to be the most powerful liberators in our world that will build a world free of sexual violence. Over the course of the next couple of weeks, we will be engaging in these 4 conversations. So today will be witnessing dignity. The following week will be healing suffering. moving into transforming love, and finally believing in liberation. Our theological framework will be grounded in the leadership trajectory found in Isaiah 61, 1-4, which is the scripture that Jesus quoted in his first public appearance. And we all know the scripture quite well, but I hope that it will come to life as we discuss what survivor care looks like in context of survivors. I want us to also consider this process of metamorphosis and the image of an egg forming into the caterpillar, moving into the cocoon, moving into the butterfly. As we delve into these difficult topics of pain, suffering, and violence, we'll also explore these concepts of healing and transformation in that movement and how that happens. And I think we find a lot of really beautiful parallels in nature that help us see this new perspective and to help us understand what liberation could look like. So I have this metaphorical metamorphosis image kind of pictured across the screen here. As I am a photographer and filmmaker, those of you who have started looking at my book, you'll see some of the work that I've done. I'll also be showing that with you in class. Because for me, I learn visually through stories in nature and also through people. And that has been able to also expand my understanding of liberation. So I'm going to be sharing some of that visual work with you. If at any moment this topic becomes difficult to hold, do what feels necessary for you, whether that be standing, moving, muting me if I'm talking too much, stretching, doing what feels necessary for you and your body. And I also want to remind you to breathe through the pain, breathe through the tension, to calm the nervous system, to bring more oxygen to the brain, which physiologically reminds our bodies that we are safe. So to begin, I actually want to start with a meditation.
You may want to speak a little louder. I think folks are having a hard time hearing you online.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, I will do my best to project even more to the, oh, there's an echo. Some people have an echo. Okay, maybe everyone in here, make sure that it's muted.
Yeah.
I'm muted now. Okay, so in kind of unifying all of us together, both in physical space and in virtual space, I want us to gently close our eyes and take a few deep breaths together. Inhaling deeply through the nose and exhaling fully. And we'll do that again for the second time together. Inhaling deeply through the nose and exhaling, depleting all of the stale air out of our bodies. And the final third breath together, inhaling through the nose and exhaling, a reminder of our common humanity that breathes. I'm going to start with our scripture. And as I read this scripture, feel how the scripture might resonate within your body differently than it has before. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God. Another breath in together and exhale. And as we've heard the scripture so many times before, we'll notice that there are labels such as the poor, the brokenhearted, the captives, the prisoners, all people considered marginalized then and now. And while these identities have pushed people to the margins, we must remember that they are not only those things. Another inhale in and out. And now consider the many identities that you carry across gender, culture, nationality, sexuality, familial history, vocation, associations, denominations, affiliation. And while some of these identities may have been pushed to the margin, they are not only those things, and you also are not only those things. So God, we thank you for being able to coexist in our multiple identities. May we witness the divine in ourselves as we also witness the divine in each other as we move in class today. Amen.
Amen.
So our first phase of this movement is witnessing dignity, the practice of identifying with stories that are not our own. And as we engage in these stories together, I'll be sharing many stories of the survivors that have transformed my approach to leadership. So I'm really grateful that there's a lot of leaders with me in this space, in this virtual room. My hope is that you might identify with some parts of the stories that you hear, whether they be of others or of my story, that will be represented throughout this course. And that's where my story begins, of being in this body. This is a picture of me when I was probably 3 with my grandfather. Interestingly, the night before my grandmother died in the hospital. And my story begins here in this body as a 3rd generation Chinese American woman, born and raised in the Bay Area. Sister, an auntie, a mother, daughter, and granddaughter. And that's where my story begins, with my grandfather pictured here. My grandfather was a minister in the Salvation Army for 35 years. He was given the Order of the Founder, which is the highest order of the denomination, for the longevity of leadership and service that he had to the church, after which he became a missionary in China. And he would send me back photos of the people that he served from various tribes. And I was always so interested in this world beyond me, beyond my very sheltered American life, and the things that he was doing out in the hill tribes in China. And his pictures, it seemed that they were always convey stories of strength, dignity, and hope, where women were laughing, children were playing, and men were engaging over cups of tea. When I was around 11, he sent me this image of this little girl, and he said it captured him because there were so many similarities, it seemed, where she was in this crowd of all these other children who are happy and smiling and playing, and yet this one child is seemingly shy, seemingly unhappy, seemingly afraid. And my grandfather titles this photo, "She Reminds Me of You." And it wasn't until now, over 15 years later, that I'm faced with this haunting realization that this little girl could have been me. And even though I didn't grow up in a rural village, I could identify with parts of this little girl's story, in that sense of sadness or of loss. Perhaps it was this understanding that girls often don't have a voice and their voices don't matter as much in the world. Perhaps it was this cultural expectation of knowing that I could never be what society expected of me. And if you look at this picture here, you see that cute little girl in the middle. That's my sister. Homegirl to the left. I would try to hide myself with oversized cargo pants and a hoodie constantly. And so that was really kind of the state of self-oppression that I was in. And even though I was lucky, very lucky, to have an abundance of resources available to me and have access to quality education that would ideally give me the freedom to make decisions that my grandparents could never have, I escaped what could have been in that I was born in a different place in time. However, my bloodline still carried this narrative that is still true for so many, where a time where baby girls were abandoned in forests due to strict rules that enforced the number of children that families could have, a time where women were seen only as commodities and traded for dowry, a time where women's feet were bound to keep them from moving and going to wherever they wanted to go. And so this image of this little girl in China haunted me in my sleep, and that's what kind of sparked this tension of struggle of wanting to understand the world from a different lens. And that's what led me into my work of documentary storytelling and filmmaking. And so growing up in then my teen years, I noticed that the media often portrayed women as, especially from non-white cultures, in places of poverty and despair and violence, and they were often seemingly complicit in their suffering. It always bothered me. Because I knew that from the stories of my bloodline of women and others in my ancestral heritage, that wasn't the case. They were not complicit to their suffering, even though there was suffering. And so I worked with many different international organizations capturing these stories of justice. And I found in this practice that in the pursuit of justice, sometimes we're trying too hard to be a voice for the voiceless, that we forget that they already have a voice. We just aren't listening.
Mm.
However, the more that I practiced listening, I discovered that the pain and the suffering was even too much for me to hold. In this work, I documented stories of women who escaped their traffickers in Mumbai. I met teenage girls who were trapped in generational cycles of forced prostitution in Calcutta. I shared meals with women who were ostracized because they had leprosy in Vietnam. I heard stories of high school students who were raped in exchange for school fees in Kenya. And I met little girls, primary school girls, married off as young as 9 to elderly men in the Maasai tribe in Kenya. I learned that 89% of sexual assault cases involve children in Zambia. And I played with children who had lost friends, parents, grandparents to preventable diseases. And in this process, I learned that 1 in 3 women are survivors of sexual or domestic violence worldwide. 1 in 3. So if we consider our congregations, family systems, the places that we work, 1/3 of women may be survivors of sexual violence. And the statistic for men is 1 in 6. Statistic for queer folk is about half. So that just helps us understand the pervasiveness that crosses all genders. For the sake of clarity, in all of my stories, I will be focused on female sexual violence, where female survivors of sexual violence are 91%, and 99% of perpetrators are male, and that's typically the context that I work in. So for the sake of clarity, over the next few weeks, I will be referring mostly to female survivors. However, I do not want to bypass stories of others from other gender identities that have experienced sexual violence. Girls and women worldwide, survivors of unspeakable violence all around the world, women are not safe even in their own bodies. And so the more I listen, the more I recognize that the pervasiveness of sexual violence cuts across all borders, all cultures, all family systems. And I found that this issue wasn't as distant as I wanted it to be. So what is sexual violence? Any act, attempt to attain a sexual act, unwanted sexual comments or advances, or acts to traffic or otherwise directed against a person's sexuality using coercion by any person, regardless of the relationship to the victim, in any setting, included but not limited to home and work, and may I add, church. This is the World Health Organization definition of sexual violence. From catcalling on the street to unwanted and inappropriate touching by men in power. I think this definition helps us to see that sexual violence occurs across the spectrum, affecting every person, whether it be victim, survivor, perpetrator, or witnesses. So sexual violence can no longer be a separate issue where we might think if it didn't happen to me, didn't happen to my child, doesn't concern me, or didn't happen to my partner, doesn't concern me. And I used to think that as well, until my work forced me to come to terms with my own experiences and observation. This is not a women's issue or a sex issue. It's an issue of power and control. So as faith leaders, when we witness injustice, a response is required. Our witness requires that we use that power, our power, to undo, not condone violence. Our witness requires that we treat women counter to the ways women have been treated historically. And our witness also requires that we unlearn biases against other bodies that might be preventing us from responding with compassion. So unlearning biases against other bodies, questions like, what were you wearing? Where were you at the time that you were raped? Were you drinking? He was your boyfriend or husband. It doesn't count. These are all comments and questions that place the blame on the survivors' bodies. And our culture and society has placed these unjust burdens on women to carry that shame of abuse and to behave according to the expectations of men. Typically, conservative politics and theology implement solutions that police and control women's bodies. And as I've just said, control is one of the forms of abuse, instead of providing a sense of compassionate care. And so instead of trying to establish advocacy solutions that induce further harm, our approach should be one of unlearning and relearning. For when we unlearn biases that we might have against other bodies, our approach to the issue of sexual violence will change. I'm going to play a film, a short film. It's a visual poem, the poem written by one of the survivors in our community. And it discusses the cultural expectations for women in Zambia in particular, and how that cultural expectation shapes our understanding of what it means to be a woman. And while I'm going to show this video from the Zambian context, we all have our own context, right? Of which the expectations might look different or similar. And so as you watch this film, listen for the similarities, but also listen to the differences of what might come up through this visual poem.
I thought I knew all about what made me a woman. I wanted nothing more than to be one, a good one. Growing up, my aspiration was to be the best cook, the best at keeping the house tidy, the best soul, the best personality. I wanted to show just how respectable I was, so I followed the rules. They said, close your legs. A good woman keeps hold of her purity. So I did. They said, cover up. A good woman does not make a man fall into sin. So I did. Because my body was a walking temptation and my responsibility was to make sure it was not loose. So I sheltered them from my supremacy. I wanted to show how honorable I was, so I tamed my tongue. They said a good woman builds a home and breaks it with her tongue. So I knew my tongue, my words were powerful, but that power needed to be controlled. So I shut up. They said a good woman is a giver. So I learned to deny myself but give myself out even when I had nothing left. I smiled even when I did not want to. I laughed, entertained comments that broke my spirit because a good woman is not too sensitive. So I understood. Don't ask me why I keep referring to myself as a woman. I am 16 years old, and all I see around me are nuanced lessons of being a good woman. A good woman is sight to behold. A good woman is at least respected. A good woman is highly spoken of by the men on the roadside playing draft. A good woman is strong as she takes upon every task with grace and no complaint. A good woman is not mistreated. If she is, at least she will not know. She will be sheltered from the pain. In my world, a good woman is the best that I can be.
So the more that I was doing this type of work in documentary filmmaking, listening to these stories of cultures that were not mine, I was even more confronted with my own bias and prejudice. And I was completely unaware of the majority of women in our world, what they experience on a daily basis. Sexual violence was an unknown issue to me because it seemed like a distant struggle, something that I could never identify with, because I didn't want to actually comprehend what that meant. And so I avoided it, seeing it as if it was an issue that was separate from me simply because I wasn't impacted by it. Until I was in my last year of university, and how are you? And I was shooting my final thesis film. And I decided to do my final thesis film in Kenya because of my documentary film work that wanted to explore more of these stories of women across the world. And I met a young woman named Nikole. She was around the same age that I was. She was just 21 years old. We were just 21 years old. She was just starting her university education, and I was just finishing mine. And I shot her story for my film and began to develop a deeper relationship and connection with her. I think the fact that we were the same age kind of helps me identify with her in a different way. And so in her story, she finished high school, first in her family to finish high school in the rural village, left her village in pursuit of education in Nairobi. While on her way, she was looking for a specific bus that would take her to her cousin's place. And a man said, "Oh, I'll help you. Let's go to this bus. This is the bus to go to the cousin's place. I actually know your cousin." Took her on that bus, went to the cousin's home, knocked on the door. She wasn't there. So the man says, "Why don't we wait at my house as we wait for your cousin? You can come over, I'll feed you." And Nikole was famished. She had been on the bus for 18 hours that day and had not eaten anything, and she was tired, she was hungry. She went to his home, ate some food, and passed out. When she woke up, she realized that she had been raped. There was a drug in her juice, and with nowhere else to go, she fled back to the same village. And she thought, let me just give up my dream of pursuing an education, because if this is what it means to go to the big city so I can pursue my dreams, then I don't want it. Went back to the village and gave up her dreams so that she could just be a tea farmer like her mom. And so one day when she was on the field in the tea farm picking the leaves, she felt super sick and realized that she was pregnant. She hid it for as long as she could, but once she started to show, her father accused her of being a promiscuous slut, kicked her out of the house. And so again, with nowhere to go, she went back to Nairobi, hoping that she could find a new life there. And so in Nairobi, she looked for anything she could do with only a high school education, which for many girls is hand washing laundry for people, cleaning people's houses, and carrying water for businesses, going to the well, carrying it to the business, going back to the well, and back and forth. The workload became so difficult for her while pregnant that she decided to get an abortion. And in many of our countries that we work in, abortion access is non-existent and it is very unsafe. And so it's undercover, under the floor, really, with doctors. And so she's in one of these clinics with a doctor in a very dark and damp environment, and is imagining that in getting this abortion, maybe she will be able to pursue that dream of education for herself. But instead, she said, for some reason, as she was waiting in line, God said to her, "This baby is going to be a blessing to you." So she listened to it. She left. She continued to work, washing laundry for people, carrying water for other people. When it was time to give birth, she had absolutely nothing. She went to the hospital, gave birth to a perfectly beautiful baby girl, and had nothing until the doctor had to wrap the baby in a hospital sheet, take the baby back. And she continued to find ways of living to support herself and her child. When the baby got a little older, she thought, maybe now I could go back to school and pursue this dream. And so her mother, who was a tea farmer, invested in her education with what little she had, which got her into the university to study psychology. Her dream now shifted from simply going to school to earn a good living to now becoming a counselor so that she can support other survivors of sexual violence like her. And she was then the first in her family to go to university. And as she was telling me the story again, I could hear my grandfather's voice saying, "She reminds me of you." Even though we were the same age and we had many similarities based on age, and I think with that age comes, the dreams that you have for yourself, our stories and our upbringings were vastly different. Our understanding of what it means to be a woman was vastly different. But still, even in those differences, we had the similar hopes for ourselves to graduate from college, to somehow make meaning in this world with our careers, to help other people through our career, and to raise children in a world that was safe. And I felt lucky that in my culture, education is mandatory, preferably get your doctorates, become a lawyer or acupuncturist or something. You have to go to school. Whereas in her culture, especially being a girl, education, that desire for education wasn't seen favorably. And trying to pursue it on her own also made her more vulnerable. And so I sent her money, just a little bit of money to help her finish her final exams for that first year of university, and she rose to the top of the class. And so that's when I began to learn about what it would look like to identify with our shared humanity. The power of Nikesa's story completely changed my perspective and shaped my perception of folks who have been pushed to the margins, folks who are survivors, folks who are women who lack access to education, folks who have children at a young age. And I developed a friendship with Nikesa and was challenged by our differences, but I was also learning a lot through our shared commonalities. And her story further clarified my belief that women are not complicit in their own suffering, but they are actively creating new pathways of liberation for the next generation. The stories we tell shape our perception of who we call the marginalized. When we can identify with the stories of others, our language shifts, our perceptions are challenged, and our biases will eventually fall away. The great Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie said, stories have been used to dispossess and to malign. But stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that dignity. So how do we do this? How do we utilize our stories and the stories we tell to empower and to repair dignity that has been broken? And for those of us who preach, we're constantly telling stories,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
For those of us who are leaders, we're constantly telling stories. For those of us who are parents, we're also constantly telling stories, right? And so I want to give a few frameworks that might help us tell those stories with dignity in a way that is empowering and restorative. So here's the practices. Number one, get closer. The great Hungarian-American photographer, Robert Capa, famously said, if your photos aren't good enough, you aren't close enough. And I believe that relates to both physical proximity, but also relational proximity. I think when we are approached with stories of pain and suffering, our initial interaction, right, is to pull away.
Yes.
To hide, to pretend it doesn't exist. And that's what I've done for so long as well. Because we're afraid of feeling that sense of suffering, that suffering will somehow transition to us. We don't want to believe that it exists. But the closer we are, the more opportunities we have to experience something new. And getting closer to Nikesa's story, learning about her story, building a friendship with her transformed my understanding of the world. We always say, have compassion, be a compassionate leader, be a compassionate pastor, compassionate leadership, all these phrases. And we have to remember that compassion means to suffer with. So to get closer. Second, honor diversity. In photography, we have the saying, shoot wide open. So for any of you who know photography, that means your aperture, which is the thing that opens and closes your shutter, the aperture is wide open. So when you shoot wide open, it allows light to come into the lens. It also has this effect similar to this photo that I have on the screen, where your focal point is clear while the background is blurry. So technically that's what it means to shoot wide open. You get lots of light and a blurry background. And that's like my favorite look. You'll see it in all my photography moving forward.
Okay.
So when you're shooting wide open and the background is blurring, how I see that is the focal point is then on the person. That all of those assumptions, all of the biases, all of the prejudices, right? All of their historical backgrounds, whatever, falls away. and we just are focusing in on the person's humanity. So to shoot wide open, I want us to consider, what would that look like to come to new communities with an open heart? Shooting wide open, allowing light to come in and allowing any assumptions to be blurry in the background so that the humanity can come to the focus. When we talk about, especially in corporate sectors, DEI initiatives, right? A hot topic, DEI. We talk a lot about racial diversity, mostly, and colorism diversity, right? But we also have to consider cultural diversity and neurodiversity, which includes folks who've experienced trauma, depression, PTSD. Survivors are included in that sense of diversity. And so when we honor these diverse stories, we're also honoring the different perspectives that they bring to the table. And lastly, share commonalities. While our experiences may be vastly different, as it was with Nikole and while I have not experienced sexual violence to the sense that she has, I believe that we can still identify in common themes of pain and grief and fear and confusion and frustration and anger. And I think this is all also evidence of Jesus' example of how he drew closer to suffering in his divinity and in his humanity. Henry Nouwen said, "Humanity suffers, but the sharing of that suffering is what helps us move forward together." So how can we move forward to witness dignity in the marginalized? So I'm going to now provide a more tangible approach through imagery to conclude our first practice of witnessing dignity. I'll share an approach from also a photography lens that can help shape our perception of the marginalized by leveraging stories of dignity. I think whether we're in a nonprofit, corporation, or church, we have to do like marketing and storytelling, right?
Yes.
So sometimes that's visually kind of what I'm doing, right? I'm projecting images on the screen. Sometimes it's through a newsletter. Sometimes it's through a grant report, right? We have to tell the stories of the community impact that we're making. And so I'm going to share a visual practice that might be helpful for all of you that are doing that type of work in storytelling and marketing, but also a philosophical perspective that might be of help. And so here you'll see in this image, in this aperture, that's what an aperture looks like, by the way, in the picture, lighting, gaze, and posture. So there's three things that I want us to consider as we practice witnessing dignity in our communities. So the first is lighting. And lighting is essential in photography because it has the coexistence of darkness and lightness. If you have all lightness, your image will be white. It'll be blown out, as we say. So we have to have both the dark and the light together in order for the image to come through. And that is dependent on how you are exposing your image. When we look at light as well, there's color tones to light, where it could be warm or it can be cool. And in the warmth of the image, I'm biased more towards warm images that tint toward more orange feels. That warmth also gives us a sense of, I think, humanity and connection as opposed to cool and dead connection, disconnection, cool and dead disconnection. I also think lighting could be a way that helps us look toward hope. So in this image is also in my book, printed in my book. I think I use this image to conclude one of my chapters around what hope looks like. And so as we look toward hope, typically we're looking toward light. We're looking to what's ahead. We're looking toward that warmth as well that is offering that sense of light. Lighting also helps us to focus. When you're trying to focus in a dark room, you can't do it, actually. You need the light to focus. And so the clarity that comes with having light also helps the image become more clear. When we think of light, we also think of, let's say, like stage production, spotlights, right? So as we tell the story, we must also consider who's in the spotlight, whose voice and vision is being platformed on the stage. And as a storyteller, I'm sure we've seen this many times, right? In our saviorisms, we tell the story of how amazing we are, right? As opposed to the story that we're actually trying to tell and maybe the learnings that came out of that story. So who's in the spotlight? Whose voice and vision and perspective is being platformed as you're telling the story? Secondly is gaze. Gaze. So traditionally in our world, all marketing and advertising has been defined by the white male gaze. Evidence of sexualization and objectification of women, evidence of how people of color have often been seen in the more sidekick roles in media, right? With the white male protagonist, we still see that today. And so in a world that's defined by the white male gaze, how do we redefine images through a more feminine lens that embraces womanhood, that embraces feminine power? And as we think of gaze as well, consider what is it that we're looking toward? What are we looking at, right? What are we gazing at? In this particular image, I was capturing one of the stories of one of our community members that was self-harming. And in this image, I actually wanted to capture the wounds. You can see it very faintly in her left arm. Yeah, that one, and also a bit on the wrist. You see it very faintly in the left hand. But as we were working together to co-create this image, she actually didn't want that hand to be in focus. So then I was like, okay, let me focus, again, like using that terminology, focus on the right hand. Whereas the left hand that has some cuts there and some scars that are still there, it's not the one in the focus. And the gaze where she's looking at, right, she's looking up kind of in this like worshipful posture because she wanted to show that she's not hiding it. It's just not the focal point. And it does not define her. In my book, you can read the full story on it, but this person also was showing me the scars in real life. And she was saying, look, my scars are now healing because scars are evidence that wounds do heal. I think that's also a really important thing to remember, that as we are healing from our own trauma in time, as the body heals itself with intentionality, time, and holistic support and community, our trauma can also heal itself.
Yes.
Amen. Thirdly is posture. If we are looking towards hope, if our gaze is centered on a more hopeful image, how is our body positioned? How are we standing or sitting? And in this case, how are we dancing? So in this image, as we were co-creating together, she wanted to convey strength, joy, and movement through dance. So she was dancing, and I was thinking like a million pictures in a minute. And there were some that I really liked that like had a more like fluid, maybe like open feel. But she said in her cultural dance, this dance is what made her feel powerful. And I'm like, okay, this is the one that's going to print, right? So as we think about postures, we think about how are images of people, how are they positioned in a way that makes them look powerful and full of authority. As we think about postures as well, for us as the storyteller, or as the leader, or as the pastor, thinking about who has a seat at the table, who's powerful, and how are they sitting at the table? Are they coming in just because they're a DEI initiative and they have no voice and they're just like sitting there like that, right? Or are they coming in ready to engage, ready to listen, ready to learn, ready to provide their solutions as well? So how can we also, in our posture of our power in leadership, utilize that to promote more inclusivity and equity and representation in the tables that we convene at? And how do we also utilize our power to give it back to others? So this is the full image of all three, lighting, gaze, and posture together. So Jesus' first public appearance that was taken from this passage that we meditated on in class in Isaiah 61, where he says, the Spirit of the Lord is on me. He has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. We see this prophecy coming to fruition when he delivered slave girls from emotional turmoil and psychological torment, when he advocated against the execution of a woman who was guilty of prostitution, when he painted a picture of love through the example of a mixed race outcast, when he gave voice to a woman whom society labeled unworthy, when he replaced shame with honor by calling a bleeding woman daughter, when he first revealed his resurrected body to, of all people, a woman. I think this is what it looks like when we want to witness dignity, or a proclamation of good news, letting survivors know, letting people know in our communities know that you are seen, you are loved, you are valued, you are worthy, you are able to achieve great things. Proclaiming good news to the poor is to proclaim freedom. So even as we talk about this term, the marginalized, I think it's important that we do not make the marginalized only about the trauma, the labels, the identities, the violence that they experience. Because as we bear witness to their power, strength, and dignity in their bodies, I think that will help us shape our perception, which will in turn shape the way that we care with and for them. And so when we practice identifying with stories that are not our own, it means that we take up the stories of others. It doesn't mean that we take up the stories of others and claim it as our own. No, it does not mean that we become a voice for them, erasing their voice and projecting our own on behalf of them. But it means that we find a common experience of shame, grief, or pain to better identify with those stories, as different as they may be, but as also common as they might be, so that we can be better advocates as we unlearn and we relearn the needs of survivors around us. And I think when we start to acknowledge our own sense of pain as we practice compassion, moving into the suffering, getting closer, as Robert Kappa said, moving closer to the suffering as opposed to avoiding it, that is how we will learn how to bear one another's burden and practice. So I'm going to close with a meditation. It's called the Love and Kindness Meditation. And I'll just take a moment for all of us just to kind of sit with all the stories that we heard, all the things that we've been experiencing in ourselves, whether it be ourselves having some tension around some of the stories or maybe a loved one. I'll just sit with that for a moment.
I'm going to thank you.
And in this meditation, we'll move from ourselves into others. And so what you'll do is just silently repeat after me these phrases. May I be safe. May I be free from harm. May I recognize divine love within me. And feel that sense of gratitude within yourself, within your body, this body that brought you to class today. We thank God for your body that showed up today and the body that needed. And we now turn our attention to a person that might be difficult to love. Someone who we might be having some tension with. Visualize them in your mind. And repeat these phrases. May you be safe.
May you be safe.
May you be free from harm. May you recognize divine love within you. And now we turn our attention to a person that is easy to love. Could be our partner, could be our child, could be a niece or a nephew or a newborn baby or even your pet. Turn your attention to that being that you love, visualizing them in your mind, and repeating, may you be saved. May you be free from harm. May you recognize divine love within you. And now we'll turn our attention to someone who is considered to be at the margins. Perhaps it's someone in your congregation, someone that you regularly see on the bus, on the side of the street. Could be a close friend. Maybe it's someone you don't know too well, but you know that there is suffering. Visualize them in your mind and repeat, may you be safe. May you be free from harm. May you recognize divine love within you. And finally, we will extend this sense of love and gratitude to all people, allowing the love for self, love for others to extend even beyond. Repeating, may all beings be safe. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings experience divine love within them. So to close this practice, we will take another 3 breaths together, a reminder of our common humanity that breathes, even in our differences, even in our different localities and locations, across cultures, across borders, across the ages. We'll inhale together through the nose. And exhale out. Inhale again together. And exhale out, and finally one more time together. Inhale through the nose, noticing how cool the air is. And a full exhale, now noticing the warmth coming out of your body. May our own breath be a reminder of the warmth that we give to others through our care, through our leadership, through our prayers, through our intention. May we learn to witness dignity in all people, especially in those who've been deemed marginalized in our communities. Amen.
Amen.
You know, I resonated with and wanted to hear more from you about. One of the more interesting things is when you said very definitively that women are not complicit in their oppression. I might challenge that a little bit. And I say sometimes women are, especially because patriarchy and patriarchal capitalism especially trains us to value the male gaze and male values so highly that we turn on each other. And sometimes we are our own worst enemy. You know, we want the kind of things that men value. So in that sense, we are complicit. And I wonder if there is, if it is important for us to recognize that complicity, and if there are strategies we can employ in order to overturn that. So that'd be one kind of thing. I really appreciated the way in which you brought your understanding and practice of photography and used that as a lens, in a way, a fun, to think about the work of liberation. And there I wonder whether you could reflect a little bit more on the kind of work that many of us do. For example, in the school, even our students come from many, many different walks of life. Many people are very involved in very practical kinds of work. So the work of photographer, the work of a banker, the work of a facilities person. How do we inject a spiritual or theological dimension for our own selves? Our work is spiritual, but for our own selves, how do we start with our very mundane practices of living? How do we create a theology or a spirituality? So that's something I was wondering about, especially with some of our students who really come from very creative spaces and find theology creative too, but sometimes the bridge is difficult. You know, I would have never really thought of photography as a bridge to thinking theologically. But having said that, again, an idea that makes me a little worried. So in photography, there is an emphasis on light and dark. And you can use light and dark poetically to create a deeper texture to the image. The problem is patriarchal capitalist whiteness has always devalued darkness. And anyone who works with light knows that light can be an instrument of torture, except that in many religious languages and perspectives, enlightenment, meaning the quality of light, is considered salvific. Would there be the possibility of considering dark salvific? I mean, the baby in the womb is nice and dark, and it's one of the safest places unless there's trauma to the mother's body. So how do we revalue darkness? And for a photographer, would that make it difficult when there's maybe really very low light? So I'm just trying to complicate the images that sometimes we may take as natural or simple to understand. So that's, those were things I was thinking about. I wrote over here is the light and dark binary. Is there a binary? Or from the way you're saying, especially in photography, it's not a binary at all. There is actually a deep relationship between the two. There is no light without the dark, without the light. That's what it is. I just want to ask the question, in photography, can we revalue darkness? And when we revalue darkness, how would that play into our spirituality? If that makes sense.
I'll go backwards.
Okay.
We're right there. So, yeah, I hear you on that. And I'm always wondering, like, why is our language around lightness, whiteness?
Yeah.
Why is our language around darkness, blackness?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
why does it have to be that way? And that's why in photography, it's not white and black. It is the coexistence of the both that make the image possible. Like I said, if it's all white, you blown out, you won't see anything. It's dark, you won't see anything as well. So that's why I'm wondering if we could just use the lighting when I'm saying lighting in this three-phase framework. Lighting as a metaphor, more so, of hope that coexists in suffering and pain. I will be talking about that more third lecture. But to use your analogy around photography, the dark room is the birthplace where photographs come to life. And that has to happen in the dark. So the question on, how do we say we reimagine darkness, right?
Or value.
We value darkness. I'll talk more about that in session 3, but I think to revalue darkness is to, what I was saying earlier today about getting closer to the suffering. Because in getting closer, you will find and experience things that you could never do outside of that. And as a precursor to the third session, it's how I see it is when we gravitate towards suffering and pain, there's a deepening, right, of the well of emotions and like the pit of despair or the dark night of the soul, right? We're like deepening that sense of pain and suffering. It just feels like so low and so hard. Those of you in depression, who've been in depression, know what that means. But actually, it's not just the deepening, it's actually an expanding. So when we're experiencing an expansion through the suffering in time, and I think in God's divine power, right, we can then experience joy, beauty, and love in more extravagant ways than we ever have before. So I think that's what happens. It's yes, the coexistence, but it's also the expansion of it. And I see it more so, yeah, simply as a metaphor for what hope could look like and feel like. Yeah. And not to say we can't have dark, because otherwise we would have just white images everywhere and we can't see anything. And then the practical work. Yeah, so yeah, in my work as a photographer, how do we, or kind of the frameworks that I've shared, right? How can that apply practically to folks in all fields, right? Whether you're a photographer or not. And that's where I shared that that second framework around getting closer, honoring diversity, sharing commonalities. I think that relates to all sectors of life and just in relationships in general, wherever we may go. When I was in Rwanda during the 20th anniversary of genocide, and we were at one of the homes that Mother Teresa's sisters founded, and it was a home for folks who were neurodivergent and who had been abandoned by their families because they've been abandoned by their families because they were unable to care for them in their needs. And there were no cameras allowed, no phones allowed in that vicinity to honor and to also to honor their experiences as experiences of themselves and to not like try to take it and like bring it home, right? But also to ensure that we were present and engaged with the people we were with as opposed to trying to take pictures or whatever. And at first I was like, because I was actually in Rwanda on a job. So that was like my job. So I was like, like, am I still gonna get paid? You know, or like, what am I gonna do? But it was actually a really good practice for me because in stripping away like what was my career at that time, I had to practice being present to those differences of what I was experiencing at the home. And so this nun was like, no pictures, no cameras, no phones allowed in the home, but take a picture with your heart. And that just always stuck with me. Like, how do I take a picture with my heart, you know? And so I think that's the practice, right? Outside of having a camera, whether you use my technique or not, how do we still take these practices and take those images in our heart where we're really taking parts of people's stories with us because we're learning from them, we're growing from them, we're actually responding to them. And I think that's where, to your point about being complicit, we're not just sitting and being complicit in the suffering of the world and holding these stories in our hearts and doing nothing about it, but that we're holding these stories or capturing these stories in our hearts so that it can have a sense of transformation within us, so that we can have actual compassion, which is external action. Compassion is, yes, suffer with and utilize that suffering to create change and alleviate the suffering in the world. That's what it means to be compassionate. So I hope that those three practices of getting closer, honoring diversity, and sharing commonalities can work in all sectors, and happy to hear more feedback if you want more specifics depending on what sector you're in. And finally, your first point around women being complicit in suffering. Yes, I see that. I see that. We work in Kenya with a community of women in prostitution, and this community was founded by one of our survivors of trafficking. She graduated through us in 2017. And after she graduated, she was like, she couldn't believe that she was trafficked around Africa, but she was almost trafficked to America. And like, when she realized the fact that she somehow got out of it, there was that sense of like gratitude, and also how now do I extend that education and that protection to other women? So she started this program. We call it Malkia, which means queen in Swahili, for women in prostitution to explore alternative livelihoods and to learn life skills, training, sexual reproductive health, and handiwork skills, such as they learn how to make yogurt and soap and mats, things that can be used for everyday common household things. And currently, this program has been in existence for many years, but currently one of the alumni run it. And I will share her story also, I think, on the last day. So I'm giving all these precursors of all my friends. So her, Serafina, she's one of the alumni, she adamantly says, no woman was meant to be in prostitution. Adamantly, all the time. And of course, there's pushback from folks in sex work and everything, but outside of that, how she sees it is no woman is meant to only be in prostitution. Because when she grew up, also a survivor of rape, which led her to the work, being in poverty, having to raise a son, take care of her family, that was the only option she had. So clearly, it might seem like she's complicit because she's there on the street, getting bids, going into the brothel, getting her money, doing it multiple times a day, up to 10 customers a day, and then doing it again tomorrow. So that could obviously look like being complicit, but if we look at, like you're saying, the patriarchal structures that teach us that we must be complicit, that's the only thing we know. However, in my experience, there's always this underlying fire that I've observed with survivors and with the women that we've encountered in our communities that want so much more for themselves and for their children and for their communities. And when we in our programs and practice, and I think this is where as pastoral leaders too, and as organizational leaders, when we provide support and services and care and compassion, that's what helps to unlock it, where we can then recognize, oh, there is a more expansive world outside of the fear that I've been living in. So I think that's an example for us as well as we might be complicit to other forms of suffering that we might experience in our family systems or our cultural systems. We may not know that we can pave a different way. And that's exactly why I have seen survivors bring that sense of liberation, because they've done that hard work and they've taught me how to also do that work and to move out of that complicit perspective.
Well, thank you. And is there anything? Okay. All right. Thank you so much. We are almost at our time, 7:30 Pacific time. Is our close. If I may, allow me to weave in some of the comments from students in the chat into my own observations. And I love that we were all sort of thinking on similar levels here. Two questions, again, flowing from one from Joelle and one from Janice. One is why Isaiah 61 and not Luke 4, which you mentioned later, but why Isaiah 61 as the framework that you're using, and particularly doesn't have anything to do with the fact that it includes the word vengeance in there. So that's one. The other, and that's Joelle's great question. Denise asked, and I also asked, how do you, when you talk about get closer, how do you actually bridge all of the mistrust, apprehension, resistance, emotional, also the normal status rankings and things that go on in human relationships? How do you negotiate all that? Particularly educational differences and things like that. Yeah, how do you actually get closer?
Yeah, so thank you for your question on Isaiah 61, because this is part one of 4 verses. That's why. I do know, yes, when Jesus made that first proclamation, he did leave out the day of vengeance of our God. I'm not a scholar, so probably you can tell me why that is. But probably in my non-scholar opinion, we don't want to focus on the vengeance, right? We want to focus on the good news. So anyway, that's my very non-scholarly answer to that. So I will be moving through 4 verses over the course of time that I think shows a trajectory of movement from where we started today. So hopefully that understanding will expand as we move forward in the coming weeks. Bridging mistrust. This is a whole section in my book with the actual stories. And let me tell a little bit of it, maybe with the time that we have, because I was actually going to do it. So I'm glad this question came up, because maybe the Lord knew I had to tell this part of the story. So, and I tell this in the book, where in Nikesa's story, I was filming with her at school, at home, to get the different dynamics of her life, and capture all parts of it. And when I was in her home, she's this tiny little thing, and we couldn't fit the 2 of us together in her home. So I had to shoot from outside the door, leave the door open and shoot from the outside. So I'm very visible as they call, so in Africa, they call basically all non-Black people, all Mzungus, which means white person. So then they're like shouting, Mzungu, Mzungu. And I'm like, not white, but okay, I am light skinned, right? So they're like shouting at me as I'm filming, and then they're shouting at her as I'm filming. I'm just like, what is going on? Like, everyone mind your business. I'm trying to film here, right? I'm trying to do my job. And then because also her home was so small, we had to film outside the home. And she was visibly nervous about this, but I was like, there's no other way. We can't fit in the home, so we have to do it outside. And so as I'm doing this, we're kind of like trying to make things work. And when I had left, all the neighbors came crowding around her and demanded that they give her the money that I gave her. And she was like, she didn't give me any money, but they were demanding. They were like, there's no way that a Mzungu came to your home and didn't give you money. There's no way. And so they were harassing her day after day. Where is the Mzungu money? Share the money, share the resources that she gave you. And she ended up having to move homes because of that incident. So talk about mistrust and the ways in which this work as being a photographer, filmmaker can be damaging, and not only being a photographer, filmmaker, but just by nature of my presence, not being from the community, not speaking the same language, not being from the same culture. There is a lot of fear and mistrust, as there should be, because a lot of folks have come in to exploit their communities. And so what had to happen after that incident, once I learned about it, it was obviously a mistake on my part, or the ways in which I just kind of came into her village and set things up and did things that worked for me, not understanding the repercussions that could happen. And so after that, there needs to be kind of what you said, that negotiation of what can work for you. How do we tell your story in the most authentic way? Is that at home? Is that not at home? How are ways that we can work together to do that? So now when we do mini documentaries with our community, some of them don't want to go home because that's the place of trauma. And so we honor that, and we'll do it in a neutral place. So there's a lot of, I think, relational building and connection and mutual understanding of the diverse cultures that need to come together. Obviously also being, Western educated, but Chinese. I come with that perspective as well. And so even the ways that they might have worked with like white Westerners are going to be different than they work with me. So then I also have to provide some education there too, to let them know where I'm coming from with my cultural background. So there's a lot of cultural dynamics that happen in our team, and we work through it through loving relationship.
I was thinking one last question for the last couple of
Yes.
minutes. The presence of China doing business and.
Yes.
So have you worked with that? Does that come up at all? Yeah.
Yes, so that's a new phenomenon. So I've been doing this work for 13 years in Kenya, and I was the only one, and now all of a sudden, I'm not the only one. I don't know enough about that topic.
Sure.
I also do not frequent the communities as often as I did back in the day. So right now, my staff run all of the programs in community. I will go when I'm invited. And so with the dynamics with China, there is a lot of tension. It is a new form of colonization for sure. And there's lots of CNN articles about it that I've been reading, and I've observed it as well. Tons of apartment complexes coming up, the Chinese owned. And I'm just like, where is the wealth going? So that concerns me. The other thing that concerns me is the roads that are being built are also Chinese labor. And I'm like, I don't know enough about politics, but I don't know who owns that road. And so I just have some questions around ownership and equity and ownership, and also how the relations are working together in the labor force. Yeah, I don't know enough.
No, you do. You're plenty. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for this moment. I see we have in the chat. The next lecture is actually next week is going to be 6:10 p.m. We're going to start at 6:10. We're going to, so we'll have that change on the website and so on. And I just want to say thank you and welcome to the School of Religion. I'd like to give President David Les's living.
No, just grateful for the conversation and the insight. I appreciate everybody's participation tonight. Look forward to the discussion the community will be engaging in further in classes and reflection around this. But thank you for being with us. Look forward to the remainder of the session.
My class, I'll see you on Saturday.
And my class, I will see you on Saturday too. See you all.